The unexpected sound. The desert world of Fortalice 9 had been silent for centuries. Beneath its endless dunes of golden sand, buried ruins whispered forgotten secrets. The sky burned orange during the day and faded into an eerie violet at night. The wind howled through the broken remains of ancient cities where no living soul had walked for thousands of years. But on this night, something changed. Deep within a forgotten underground structure, hidden beneath layers of rock and dust, a sound echoed. A heartbeat. The facility had been dead for ages, its power long depleted. But suddenly, the hum of machines returned. Engines groaned, consoles flickered, and chambers hissed with escaping steam. Something, or someone, was waking up. Inside a sealed pod, a man's eyes snapped open. His name had been lost to history, but he had once been known as Commander Darius Kane. And after 50,000 years, he was alive again. His chest heaved as the cryo-fluid drained from his pod. Muscles stiff, skin tingling, he stumbled forward, coughing. His mind was hazy, memories fragmented. What had happened? Where was he? His vision cleared, and he saw the room around him. A massive chamber lined with thousands of pods like his own. Some were cracked and broken, but others remained intact, their occupants still frozen in time. A flashing red warning light drew his attention. System reactivation. 99% complete. Darius's breath caught in his throat. If his pod had activated, then the others would soon follow. He stepped forward, struggling to remember the last thing before darkness took him. A war. An invasion. Humanity's final stand against an unstoppable enemy. And then, nothing. His fingers curled into fists. Was humanity gone? Had they lost? A sudden thud echoed through the chamber. Darius turned sharply, instincts kicking in. Someone, or something, was outside. The sound came again. A metallic scrape against the chamber's thick doors. Then, a voice, a strange, alien voice, muttering in an unknown language. Darius's heart pounded. He reached for his hip where his weapon should have been, but he was unarmed. The doors trembled as something powerful pushed against them. Darius had no idea what was waiting on the other side. But one thing was certain, he was no longer alone. The doors to the cryo chamber shook again. Darius instinctively took a step back, his mind racing. Who was out there? The last thing he remembered was war. Humanity's final stand against an enemy so powerful that their only option had been to vanish. Now, he had awakened 50,000 years later, and he had no idea what waited outside. The metal groaned, dust falling from the edges. The locks, ancient and weak, were giving way. Whatever was on the other side was strong. Darius scanned the chamber. Thousands of pods lined the walls. Many were dark and lifeless, their occupants lost to time. But others were still functional. His people were here. His hands clenched. If there were still others, if even a fraction of them could be revived, then humanity might still have a chance. The door slammed open. Darius spun around, ready to fight. But what he saw made him freeze. Two figures stood at the entrance, humanoid but alien. They were tall, with sleek, metallic armor covering their bodies. Their faces were hidden beneath smooth, featureless helmets. They carried weapons, but they hadn't raised them. The taller one stepped forward, scanning the room. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down Darius's spine, it spoke. Impossible. One of them is awake. The alien's words were in an unknown language, but Darius understood them perfectly. His body tensed. If they knew what he was, then that meant they knew about humanity. And that meant they were the enemy. Darius's eyes darted to a rusted metal pipe lying near a broken control panel. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, grabbed the pipe, and swung. The first alien barely had time to react. The pipe smashed against its helmet, cracking the visor. The creature staggered back, hissing in pain. The second one lifted its weapon, but Darius was already moving. He tackled the alien, knocking its gun aside as they crashed to the floor. A burst of energy exploded against the ceiling. Sparks rained down as the weapon discharged wildly, blowing a chunk out of the ancient walls. The first alien recovered fast, reaching for something on its wrist. An alarm. A signal. Darius couldn't let that happen. He grabbed the second alien's dropped weapon, aimed, and fired. A streak of blue energy pierced through the first alien's chest. It let out a strangled sound before collapsing. The second alien was still alive, but now it was trapped beneath him. Darius pressed the weapon against its helmet. "Start talking," he growled. "Who are you? Where am I?" The alien shook its head. Darius gritted his teeth. "Fine." With a swift motion, he ripped off the alien's helmet. What he saw underneath sent a shockwave of rage through his body. The creature wasn't fully alien. It had human features, partially twisted, mixed with something unnatural. Its eyes were too large, its skin an unnatural grayish tone, its veins glowing faintly with something artificial. It was a hybrid, half human, half something else. Darius's stomach twisted. What had happened in the last 50,000 years? The hybrid coughed, struggling to speak. You shouldn't be here." Darius grabbed its collar, pulling it closer. "Why? What happened to my people?" The hybrid's eyes flickered with something close to fear. "Your people are gone." Darius's blood turned to ice. Before he could react, a deep rumble echoed through the facility. The hybrid's expression changed to terror. "You don't understand," it gasped. "You waking up. It's already too late." The ground beneath them shook violently. Alarms flared to life, not just inside the room, but throughout the entire structure. And then, through the open door, Darius saw it. The sands outside were shifting. Something massive was rising from beneath the desert. Something that had been waiting for him to wake up. The ground trembled violently beneath Darius's feet. Dust rained from the ceiling as the ancient facility groaned in protest. Something massive was waking up. The hybrid beneath him gasped, eyes darting toward the doorway. Fear, pure and raw, was written across its face. Darius tightened his grip. "What's out there?" The hybrid swallowed hard. A mistake, a relic of the past. And now, it's awake. Darius didn't have time for riddles. He yanked the alien up and shoved it against the wall. "Explain." The hybrid flinched as the rumbling grew louder. This planet, it was never just a wasteland. It was a tomb. Your people, they buried something here, something they created. Darius's heart pounded. A weapon, a secret project. His memories were still fragmented, but he remembered Earth's last war. Humanity had been losing. Their enemies had been relentless, pushing them back system by system. If his people had truly fallen, then it made sense that they would leave behind something terrible. A new sound joined the chaos, a deep mechanical groan, like metal grinding against itself. Darius turned to the entrance. Beyond the shifting sands, a massive silhouette was rising from the desert. It was a ship. No, not just a ship. Darius recognized the design, even through the layers of dust and time. The enormous structure emerging from beneath the ground was unmistakable. It was a Titan-class warship, one of the last and deadliest vessels humanity had ever built. It had been buried for 50,000 years. Now, it was waking up. The hybrid shook its head frantically. "You don't understand. That thing wasn't meant to fly again. It was left here for a reason." Darius ignored him. His body was moving on instinct, his mind racing. If there was a ship, then there had to be a command center. He sprinted toward the entrance, stepping into the harsh desert air. The full size of the warship became clear as more of it emerged from the sand. It was colossal, its armored hull stretching for kilometers. Weapons arrays lined its surface, long dormant but still deadly. Darius's breath caught. If he could get to it, if he could bring it online, he could take it. He could use it. But he wasn't the only one watching. A distant roar split the sky. Darius's head snapped up just in time to see dark shapes moving toward them. Ships, sleek, fast, and alien. The hybrid cursed under its breath. They're coming. They must have detected the energy surge when you woke up. Darius clenched his fists. No time to hesitate. He turned back toward the ancient facility, looking at the thousands of cryopods still locked in sleep. If this ship was here, then maybe, just maybe, his people were here too. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. But first, he had to reach that ship before the enemy did. Because if they got to it first, then humanity's last weapon would become their greatest nightmare. Darius didn't waste another second. His instincts screamed at him to move, to act, to take control before it was too late. The sight of the Titan-class warship rising from beneath the sand filled him with an almost surreal sense of awe, but there was no time to stop and admire the relic of his past. If that ship truly was operational, then it was his best chance to turn the tide against whatever had taken over the galaxy in the last 50,000 years. The hybrid, still catching its breath, scrambled after him. Wait, you can't just. Darius spun around so fast that the alien nearly crashed into him. Listen to me, he growled, his grip tightening around the weapon he had taken earlier. That ship, who buried it? Why was it left behind? The hybrid hesitated, looking toward the massive structure as more of its colossal form was revealed from beneath the sands. The last war, it said finally, voice filled with something close to dread. Humanity built the Titan class as a final act of desperation. But before it could be deployed, something changed. The war ended in a way no one expected. Darius narrowed his eyes, his mind racing to piece together the broken fragments of memory that still eluded him. What do you mean? The hybrid exhaled sharply. You think your people lost, don't you? Darius didn't respond immediately. But deep down, he knew that had always been his assumption. Why else would he have been in cryo-sleep for 50,000 years? Why else would there be no signs of humanity anywhere? But the hybrid's expression was grim as it continued. No one knows exactly what happened, but one day, without warning, every trace of the old human civilization just vanished. Your colonies, your fleets, even the enemy forces fighting against you, gone. Only scattered ruins and abandoned battlefields remained. The galaxy still tells stories about it, whispers of a war that ended with the complete erasure of two civilizations. Darius's breath caught. That didn't make sense. How could an entire war just stop? How could both sides simply disappear without a trace? But before he could question further, a deafening explosion shattered the sky. Darius's instincts screamed at him to dodge as a blast of energy obliterated the ground where he had been standing just moments before. The hybrid yelped, diving behind the remains of a rusted console, but Darius had already turned toward the sky, his gaze locking onto the fleet of enemy ships that had just entered the atmosphere. They were sleek, dark, and fast, descending toward the Titan-class warship like a swarm of hungry predators sensing weakness in their prey. Their weapons glowed ominously, preparing to fire again. Darius didn't hesitate. This conversation can wait. He snapped, grabbing the hybrid and pulling it to its feet. If those ships reach the Titan before I do, we're both dead. The hybrid didn't argue this time. Together, they ran, their feet pounding against the cracked metal floors of the ancient facility as they made their way toward the warship's entrance ramp. The ground continued to shake, but this time, it wasn't just from the ship's awakening. It was from the bombardment raining down upon them. Enemy blasts struck the surrounding ruins, sending plumes of dust and fire into the air. The smell of scorched metal filled Darius's lungs. His heart pounded as he pushed forward, dodging falling debris and sprinting faster than he ever had before. He could see the entrance now, a massive hangar bay, still partially buried but beginning to open as ancient mechanisms rumbled to life. The enemy ships weren't stopping. They were coming in fast, moving to cut him off before he could reach his goal. Darius gritted his teeth. Not today. Just as one of the alien ships prepared to unleash another devastating blast, a new sound cut through the chaos. A deep, resonating hum. A vibration that sent shockwaves through the air. And then, in a flash of blinding blue light, the Titan-class warship fired its first shot in 50,000 years. The energy blast tore through the sky, striking one of the enemy ships directly in its center. The sleek vessel didn't stand a chance. It exploded in a violent burst of fire and debris, sending shockwaves that knocked the remaining ships off course. Darius skidded to a stop, his eyes widening. The ship was still operational. Somehow, even after 50,000 years of silence, the Titan class had awakened, and it was still very much alive. Darius didn't have time to process the impossible. The Titan-class warship had just fired a shot. After 50,000 years buried beneath the sand, it was still active. The sheer force of its weapon had torn through one of the enemy ships like paper, and now the remaining vessels were scrambling to adjust their attack. But they weren't retreating. No, they were adapting. Darius gritted his teeth, yanking the hybrid to its feet. "Move," he barked, dragging it toward the now opening hangar bay. The ship's entrance was slow, ancient mechanisms grinding against centuries of rust and decay. But there was no turning back now. If they could just get inside before the enemy regrouped. A deafening explosion shook the ground, nearly knocking Darius off his feet. The enemy fleet was retaliating. This time, their shots weren't targeting him. They were aiming directly at the Titan class itself. Darius barely had time to react before a blinding beam of energy slammed into the side of the warship. The sheer force of the blast sent shockwaves through the air, and for a horrifying second, Darius thought the ship might collapse before he could even reach it. But as the dust settled, the Titan class remained standing. More than that, it was waking up. The deep, resonating hum of its systems powering on vibrated through the air. Ancient circuits, long dormant, flickered to life. Darius could feel it in his bones. The ship wasn't just some old relic waiting to be salvaged. It was alive. He pushed forward, his legs burning as he sprinted for the hangar bay. "Come on," he shouted over his shoulder. The hybrid hesitated, staring at the warship in stunned disbelief. That thing shouldn't even be functional. How? Darius didn't slow down. "Ask later. If we don't get inside now, we won't live long enough to find out." The enemy ships circled overhead, their movements becoming sharper, more precise. They had realized brute force wouldn't be enough. Now, they were calculating. Another blast came, this one aimed for the hangar itself. Darius barely made it inside before the explosion shook the ground behind him. Metal groaned, dust rained from the ceiling, and for a brief, terrifying moment, the entrance trembled as if it might collapse. Then, silence. Darius staggered forward, coughing as he waved away the dust. The hybrid stumbled in after him, gasping for breath. "We're inside. Now what?" Darius didn't answer immediately, because the moment he turned around, he realized they weren't alone. The hangar was vast, far larger than he had expected. But what caught his attention weren't the towering support beams or the ancient fighters lined up in rusted rows. It was the figures standing at the center. At least a dozen humanoid figures, motionless, covered in thick layers of dust, standing in rigid formation. Their armor was heavy, their visors dark, their weapons clutched tightly in their hands. They weren't moving. They weren't breathing. But Darius knew exactly what they were. Soldiers. More than that, they were human. The hybrid took a step back, its eyes wide with something close to fear. What is this?" Darius's pulse pounded in his ears. He stepped forward cautiously, brushing a hand over the nearest figure's armor. The material was cold, unyielding, but beneath the dust, it was still intact. Cryostasis. These weren't statues. They were warriors, frozen in time, waiting for a command that had never come. Darius turned to the hybrid, his voice low, almost reverent. This ship wasn't just buried, it was sealed, with its crew still inside. And then, one of the figures twitched. A slow mechanical whir filled the air as the soldiers began to wake up. Their visors flickered with faint blue light, their joints creaking as they shifted for the first time in millennia. The hybrid stumbled backward in horror. "Darius, what did you do?" Darius didn't answer. He was too busy watching as the first of the ancient warriors finally raised its head and looked directly at him. The ship's interior rumbled as systems long dormant roared back to life. Dim emergency lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows over the hangar bay, while ancient displays buzzed and crackled as they struggled to reboot. Darius barely noticed. His entire focus was on the warriors standing before him. They weren't statues. They weren't ghosts of a forgotten past. They were waking up. The first soldier, his armor thick and plated in a style that hadn't been seen in over 50,000 years, shifted slightly, his movements slow, almost mechanical. A deep, static-filled voice crackled from his helmet speaker. "Operational systems. Rebooting. Identity scan in progress." Darius took a cautious step forward. The hybrid beside him tensed, but didn't move, its fear almost tangible. The soldier's visor flickered. Then, with a sharp hiss, his helmet retracted. The face beneath was human, but not just any human. This was one of the ancients. His skin was pale, untouched by sunlight for millennia. His eyes, deep, piercing, studied Darius with something between recognition and confusion. His expression was unreadable, but when he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Identity confirmed. You are human." The other soldiers stirred, their helmets retracting one by one. More faces, more humans. Their expressions varied. Some were dazed, others wary, a few instinctively reaching for weapons that had long since fused with time. Darius swallowed hard. Who are you?" The first soldier straightened, his gaze unwavering. "We are the Lost Legion, the last defenders of the Titan-class warship Erebus. Our mission was to guard this ship until humanity called upon us again." He glanced around, taking in the dust-covered walls, the flickering lights, the ancient fighters still locked in place. His brows furrowed slightly. "How long has it been?" Darius hesitated. He could barely believe what he was seeing, let alone process how to explain it. 50,000 years. A heavy silence followed. Then, the soldier's jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists. His gaze turned sharp, calculating. 50,000 years. He repeated, almost to himself. His expression darkened. "Then that means..." Before he could finish, a deep alarm suddenly blared through the hangar. Darius flinched, instinctively looking up. The ship's systems were still rebooting, but one thing was clear: the war had already begun. The hybrid cursed, stepping back as holographic displays flickered into life across the walls. Enemy ships were closing in, hundreds of them. The earlier attack was just the beginning. They had realized what was buried here, and now they were coming to destroy it before it could fully awaken. Darius turned back to the ancient warrior, his heart hammering. "Listen, I don't know how much time we have, but we need this ship operational. Now." The soldier didn't hesitate. He turned to his squad, his voice snapping with authority. "All units, systems check. Prepare for full activation of the Erebus. We are at war." The other soldiers moved instantly. Even after thousands of years in stasis, their discipline remained unshaken. They spread out, activating control panels, accessing weapon systems, bringing up shields. The ship groaned as it awakened, its ancient power surging through every corridor. Darius barely had time to process it. These soldiers weren't relics of the past. They were warriors, ready to fight. The first soldier turned back to him. "You, Darius, are you in command?" Darius hesitated. "I know, I just..." "Then who is?" Darius blinked. His mind raced. There was no chain of command, no higher authority left to give orders. The humans who had built this ship, who had commanded these soldiers, were long dead. And yet, Darius was human. The soldier stared at him, waiting, expecting. Then, slowly, he went down on one knee. By protocol of the Titan-class fleet, command defaults to the highest-ranked human present. His voice was firm, absolute, until proven otherwise. You are our commander. Asterisk, asterisk. The other soldiers followed suit, kneeling in perfect unison. A hybrid gasped. Darius, they're swearing loyalty to you. Darius stood frozen. This wasn't what he had expected. He had come here for answers. He had come here looking for lost history. Instead, he had awakened an army. And now, as the enemy fleet closed in for the final strike, he had to make a choice. Would he run, or would he lead? The Erebus shuddered as power surged through its ancient systems. Engines roared back to life. Weapons that had been silent for 50,000 years awakened with a deadly hum. The darkness that had covered the warship for millennia was now fading as bright lights illuminated every corridor, every hangar, every weapon deck. Darius stood at the center of the command bridge, surrounded by the kneeling warriors of the Lost Legion. The last defenders of an ancient human empire. They had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the call to arms. And now, they had their orders. Darius took a deep breath, his hands gripping the command console. The enemy fleet was almost here, hundreds of alien warships, all converging on the desert world, preparing to wipe the Erebus from existence. A voice crackled through the newly reactivated comm systems. This is Admiral Kelm of the HFY Dominion. Unidentified vessel, you are trespassing on restricted space. Surrender immediately or be annihilated. Darius narrowed his eyes. Trespassing. This was a human warship, built long before the HFY even existed. They had no right to this space. He glanced at the lead ancient warrior, the one who had sworn loyalty first. The soldier's name, according to the old identification markers, was Commander Joran Voss. Voss met his gaze with calm certainty. Your orders, Commander. Darius hesitated, feeling the weight of this moment. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a general. He was just a researcher who had stumbled into something far greater than himself. But the HFY didn't care who he was. They saw him, and this ship, as a threat. And if he didn't act, they would destroy everything. His hesitation vanished. He turned back to the controls, his voice steady. Battle stations. Prepare for war. Voss grinned, his movements swift as he relayed the command to his troops. All units, weapons hot. Shields to maximum. Bring main cannons online. The ship rumbled as long-dormant weapons locked onto targets. The Erebus was old, but it was a Titan-class warship, one of the most powerful vessels ever built by humanity. Even after 50,000 years, it was still a force of destruction. The enemy fleet opened fire first. Bright energy blasts streaked through space, aimed directly at the warship. The shields flared, absorbing the first wave of attacks. Alarms blared as kinetic rounds impacted the outer hull. The HFY thought they had the advantage. They were wrong. Darius' voice rang through the bridge. Return fire. The Erebus answered. Titan-class plasma cannons ignited. Massive beams of raw energy lanced through the darkness, slicing through the enemy ranks like paper. The first HFY battleship exploded in a flash of blue fire. Then another, and another. The ancient warship moved like a beast awakening from slumber. Turrets rotated, targeting cruisers and corvettes, tearing them apart with precision strikes. Missiles streaked through the void, locking onto enemy frigates. Shockwaves rippled through space as ships detonated one after another. Darius barely had time to process the sheer destruction unfolding before him. The HFY fleet had no idea what they had awoken. Panic filled the enemy comm channels. This isn't possible. That ship, it's too powerful. The HFY admiral's voice returned, but now it was filled with fear. Cease fire. We surrender. Darius stared at the display. The HFY were running. Their once mighty fleet was now a graveyard of burning wreckage. Voss turned to him, awaiting his command. "Do we let them go?" Darius took a deep breath. Every part of him wanted to finish them, to make them pay for desecrating the past. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about sending a message. He met Voss' gaze and spoke with quiet authority. "Let them go, but make sure they remember this day." Voss nodded and relayed the order. The surviving Hyra ships fled at full speed, scattering like insects. The battle was over. But Darius knew this was only the beginning. He turned to the display of the galaxy before him. Humanity had been forgotten, erased from history. The empires that now ruled had no idea what had been lost. That was about to change. Darius exhaled slowly, set a course. Voss raised an eyebrow. Destination. Darius' eyes burned with determination. Earth.